In the quiet town of Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, life seemed safe, predictable, almost idyllic. Mount Vernon was the kind of place where neighbors waved to one another, where crime was practically unheard of, and where people felt comfortable leaving their doors unlocked at night. It was a town that seemed protected from the chaos of the outside world. But on the night of October 4, 2009, that sense of safety was shattered forever. In one of the most shocking and brutal crimes the state of New Hampshire had ever seen, a mother's life was taken in her own home, not by accident, not in a random act of desperation, but in a calculated and sadistic attack carried out by two young men. This is the story of Kimberly Cates, a beloved wife, mother, and nurse, and how her life was stolen by Stephen Spader and Christopher Gribble in a crime so brutal it would leave an entire community traumatized. To understand the true weight of this tragedy, we first need to know who Kimberly was. Kimberly Cates, known to her friends as Kim, was a 42-year-old nurse. She lived in Mount Vernon with her husband, David Cates, and their 11-year-old daughter, Jamie. By all accounts, Kimberly was a kind-hearted woman. As a nurse, she had dedicated her life to caring for others, often working long hours but always making time for her family. She had chosen Mount Vernon because it seemed like the perfect place to raise a child: quiet streets, close-knit community, surrounded by woods and rolling hills. Kim and David had built a warm, comfortable home, the kind of place where laughter filled the rooms and family life thrived. To neighbors and co-workers, she was described as gentle and selfless, someone who radiated kindness. Her daughter, Jamie, was the center of her world. That's what makes this story all the more heartbreaking. Because on that October night in 2009, Kimberly's safe haven became the setting of unimaginable horror. While Kimberly was building a life rooted in love and family, across town two young men were spiraling down a very different path. Stephen Spader was just 17 years old, but by that age, he had already developed a reputation as a troublemaker. He had been expelled from school, cut ties with family, and drifted toward darkness. He often bragged about his fascination with death, violence, and control. Those close to him recalled that he seemed to enjoy intimidating people, and he spoke openly about violent fantasies. Spader had a need to be seen as a leader, someone powerful, someone feared. He created what he called a club, which he named the Disciples of Destruction. It wasn't a real gang, but in his mind, it gave him authority. He would tell others that initiation into the group required acts of violence. Then there was Christopher Gribble, 19 years old, who fell under Spader's influence. Gribble had his own troubled background, strained relationships with his family, feelings of alienation, and a disturbing fascination with cruelty. Where Spader was the self-proclaimed leader, Gribble became his eager follower. Together, they fed off each other's darkest impulses. They wanted to prove themselves. They wanted to cause pain. And most chilling of all, they wanted to kill. In the days leading up to October 4th, Spader and Gribble began planning. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't even a robbery gone wrong. It was premeditated. They armed themselves with knives, and most notoriously, a machete. To them, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of power, of control, of the destruction they wanted to unleash. That night, the two of them weren't alone. They were accompanied by two other acquaintances, William Marks and Quinn Glover, both teenagers themselves. But unlike Spader and Gribble, these two were more hesitant, more uncertain about what was unfolding. The plan, according to Spader, was simple: break into a house, any house, and attack whoever was inside. It didn't matter who lived there. To them, the victims were irrelevant. The crime was about the thrill, the rush, and the cruelty of the act itself. And so, under the cover of darkness, they set out. It was after midnight when they arrived in Mount Vernon. They drove through the quiet streets until they spotted the home of Kimberly Cates. The house was dark, the family asleep inside. To the intruders, this was perfect. Around 4 a.m., the group made their move. Stephen Spader carried the machete, while Gribble held knives. They slipped inside the house, moving silently through the rooms, looking for a victim. Eventually, they entered the master bedroom, where Kimberly and her daughter, Jamie, were asleep together in the bed. What happened next would shock the entire state of New Hampshire. When Stephen Spader and Christopher Gribble entered the Cates home in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, it was the early hours of October 4, 2009. The town was quiet. The streets empty. For most people, it was just another peaceful night. But for Kimberly Cates and her daughter Jamie, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Inside the master bedroom, Kimberly stirred in her sleep as the intruders approached. She had no way of knowing that her home had been chosen at random. No way of knowing that a 17-year-old boy stood in her doorway, gripping a machete. What followed was a sudden, brutal assault. Stephen Spader raised the machete and began hacking at Kimberly as she lay in bed. Christopher Gribble joined in with knives. The attack was frenzied and merciless. Kimberly fought desperately, but the injuries were catastrophic. Beside her, 11-year-old Jamie woke to the chaos. She was struck as well, slashed and stabbed, but miraculously, she survived. The scene was horrifying. The violence had no motive beyond cruelty itself. Once the attackers had done what they came to do, they left Kimberly dead in her own bed, her daughter clinging to life. When the intruders left, the house was silent again. Jamie, though gravely wounded, managed to stay conscious. Despite her injuries, she had the presence of mind to crawl to a phone and dial 911. Her call, faint and weak, was recorded as one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. She told the dispatcher that her mother was dead. That she had been attacked. That strangers had broken into their home. Within minutes, police officers and emergency responders arrived at the quiet Mount Vernon house. What they found inside would stay with them forever. The sight of Kimberly's body, the blood, the broken bed, and Jamie, barely clinging to life, it was almost too much to comprehend. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed emergency surgery. Against all odds, she survived. Mount Vernon was a small town. Murders were almost unheard of. A crime of this brutality? Unimaginable. The New Hampshire State Police launched a massive investigation immediately. Detectives worked quickly, canvassing the area, looking for leads. They didn't have to wait long. In the days following the murder, word began to spread among local teenagers. Spader and Gribble, far from hiding their crime, bragged about it. They told acquaintances about the attack, describing it in chilling detail. They even showed off the machete, still stained with blood. It didn't take long for someone to come forward. Soon, all four suspects, Stephen Spader, Christopher Gribble, William Marks, and Quinn Glover, were in custody. When questioned by police, Spader and Gribble showed no remorse. Spader, only 17, spoke with a chilling calmness, admitting that he had killed Kimberly. He even seemed proud of it, framing it as a test of his power, a way to prove himself. Gribble's statements were equally disturbing. He described the events in detail, almost clinically, as if he were talking about something he had read in a book rather than something he had done. The two other teens, Marks and Glover, admitted their involvement but claimed they had not participated in the violence itself. They had been present but hadn't raised a hand against the victims. Their roles, however, still tied them to the crime. The evidence was overwhelming. Bloodstains. The weapons. Testimony. And most importantly, Jamie's survival and ability to identify her attackers. The trials of Stephen Spader and Christopher Gribble became some of the most high-profile criminal cases in New Hampshire history. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and grieving family. For many, the most shocking element wasn't just the brutality of the crime, but the complete lack of remorse from the killers. Spader, in particular, treated the proceedings with arrogance. He even asked to be tried as an adult, not to reduce his sentence, but because he wanted the recognition of being a convicted murderer. He referred to himself proudly as a killer. In November 2010, after weeks of testimony and evidence, Spader was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and witness tampering. The sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gribble followed soon after. He admitted freely that he had attacked Kimberly and Jamie, but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His defense argued that his mental health issues impaired his ability to understand his actions. But the jury didn't buy it. He, too, was convicted of first-degree murder and given life without parole. As for the other two, William Marks and Quinn Glover, they cooperated with authorities, testifying against Spader and Gribble. Marks received 30 to 60 years in prison. Glover was sentenced to 20 to 40 years. Through it all, the most incredible part of this story was Jamie's survival. At just 11 years old, she endured a night of horror that no child should ever face. She sustained serious injuries, stab wounds and deep cuts, but she pulled through. Her survival was due not only to her own courage, but to the doctors who fought to save her life. Her testimony in court helped secure the convictions. Speaking about what happened to her and her mother was unimaginably difficult, but it showed the strength of someone far beyond her years. Today, Jamie continues to live with the scars of that night, both physical and emotional. But she is also a symbol of resilience. The murder of Kimberly Cates shook Mount Vernon to its core. The community, once considered one of the safest in New England, was forced to confront a new reality, that such brutality could strike anywhere, even in the most peaceful towns. For the Cates family, the loss was devastating. Kimberly's husband, David, was left to raise Jamie alone. He became an outspoken advocate for victims' rights, channeling his grief into something meaningful. Even years later, people in Mount Vernon remember exactly where they were when they heard the news. The name Kimberly Cates remains etched into the memory of the community. The story of Kimberly Cates is not just about the unimaginable cruelty of two young men. It is also about the strength of a family, a community, and a young girl who survived against all odds. It is a reminder that evil can sometimes come from unexpected places, even from teenagers in a quiet New England town. But it is also a reminder of resilience, of courage, and of the importance of never forgetting the victims. Kimberly's life was one of care, compassion, and love. And though it ended in violence, that legacy of kindness is what continues to define her memory, not the actions of those who tried to destroy it.
If you found this case as shocking and haunting as I did, consider subscribing for more true crime stories told in depth. Each case reminds us not only of the darkness in the world, but also of the strength of those who endure. Thank you for listening.